everybody, and welcome back to Conversations with Authors. It's very, very lovely to see you all in the audience today, and even more as you're pouring in. Thank you for putting up with our smooth bookstore jazz while we're getting our stuff together. Today we bring to you Keith Corbin, the author of Carolina. That's where my dad is right now. I just got off the phone with him. Author of California Soul, the great state of California, in conversation with Carla Hall. But before we get to our authors properly, please allow me to welcome you back to Conversations with Authors. If you have seen one of these events before, we're very glad to see you again. But if you're new here, then Book Passage is an independently run bookstore out of the San Francisco Bay Area. We host and run book talks just like this one very often throughout the week. As we're now streaming on YouTube and have a number of events in person, and will continue to do so in the future, please consider subscribing by clicking the subscribe button just below the video. It's completely free to you. It helps us out a lot. And as an added bonus, if you click the little bell, you'll get a notice every time that we go live with talks just like these, so you don't have to miss out on something you otherwise might have really enjoyed. If you'd like to check out our upcoming events, including all the in-person ones and events at Dominican and a number of other places, or just like the idea of receiving our email newsletter, you can find both of those or all of that at bookpassage.com. And if you'd like to check out our speaker's book tonight, which is, again, California Soul, you can find it using the very first link in the description below, or again at bookpassage.com. Lastly, if you have any questions tonight, please take the time to write them in the YouTube chat. It is the only way to get your questions to the speakers today, so don't miss your chance. And now, allow me to introduce Keith Corbin, who is the James Beard Award-nominated executive chef and co-owner of Alta Adams in Los Angeles, named one of the best restaurants in the country, by Esquire, Thrillist, and the Los Angeles Times. A native of Watts, Corbin was formerly director of operations at local food restaurant group and worked for Daniel Patterson at his Michelin-starred fine dining restaurant Koi in San Francisco. Carla Hall gained her audience when she competed on Bravo's Top Chef and Top Chef All-Stars. She has been a TV personality since then, co-hosting on the ABC talk show The Chew, contributing to Good Morning America, and featuring as a judge on Crazy Delicious on Netflix and on Bake Away Camp on the Food Network. We are very delighted to have both of them here with us today. Thank you, everybody, for coming and for writing. Welcome. Keith,
all right. Thank you, Nick. I really appreciate it. And Keith, oh my gosh. I am so excited to be here. I'm so honored that you asked me to host this book chat with you. So congratulations on an incredible book.
I'm glad you enjoyed it. And thank you for taking the time out to join me tonight. I appreciate it.
I just want to say to everybody out there, so Keith gave me an advance copy, and so here it is. I have like a galley copy. It's all like written in and everything. Every couple of chapters, I would shoot Keith a text like, "Oh my God, this is so good! It's so good!" And I have to tell you that I didn't want it to end because I thought that you had taken me and put me in your life. And up until today, I didn't read the last 2 chapters. I literally did not want it to end. And I saw you a couple of months ago. I was at Alta and I was with my cousin and my cousin and my nephew. And I just didn't want it to end. And I want to talk to you. First of all, how did your book release party go? I just want to ask you that and get that out of the way.
So the book release party for me, for one, let's just start here. I grew up in, for the most part, a hopeless environment, right? I had my good times, but I can't recall celebration, right? I could never recall moments where I celebrated things, like birthday parties. Yes, my family did the best they could to get a cake or whatever, but like birthday celebrations. So when we had the book release party, everyone was asking me, how does it feel? And then, how does it feel? I just didn't know how to celebrate. So when we were planning it, I was just gonna have a few people get together. my wife Renee put this big old sheen thing on, and we invited over 160 people came from all walks of life. I mean, from NFL to authors to food writers to news to other chefs. Like they all came out and supported, which is great. But my daughter, my 19-year-old daughter, over the course of this transition I've been on from the streets to prison to redefining myself, I lost some people. Some people wanted to hold on to the old me. Some people thought I was easy to deal with when I was in the streets and on drugs, and I was dependent on them. And my daughter, leaving her mother and leaving the house, and, they talk so bad about me to her, about I changed and how don't nobody like me no more from my old lifestyle. And so that kind of swayed her. And then there was moments when we got together and I try to tell her, like, you shouldn't talk like that. Yeah, you're from poverty. You shouldn't claim to be ghetto, or have a little more respect when you speak to adults, especially me. And one of her things was, you didn't used to trip. You didn't never trip before. So where she was at and where I was going collided. And so our relationship strained. But this book release party, she came. She showed up and she came. And this is the first time she's witnessed me in my element, like bear witness to what I had going on. And during the course of that book release, a daughter came up to me and told me this is one of her most proudest moments.
Oh.
This was one of her most proudest moments, and that she recognized now that I wasn't the weirdo, but everybody who couldn't support what I was trying to do was the weirdo, right? It got to the point to where my daughter were co-signing books with me.
Oh my God.
Right? So there are books out there with both of our signature from that night. And to have that experience, and to have her now see what I was working towards and what I was building, and have her be proud and tell me that she's glad and thankful that I've changed. It's like I don't.
The gift is that.
I don't even know where to put that on like a magnitude level. Like it was everything, it was just absolutely everything. Don't cry, Carla.
As you say that, because there's so many things that I want to unpack from that moment. Has she? This is Kiana. Is how
Kiviana.
Kiviana.
Yes.
Has she read your book?
So since the book party, Kiviana read that book in two and a half days.
Yeah.
She had it on the passenger seat. She would go out with her girlfriends reading the book. She would come back home, want to read it. And when I was in the streets, I hid my lifestyle from Kiviana and my kids. So it's like wearing two hats. The moment I walked in the door, I was her father and I wasn't the gangster, but I wasn't doing a good job being the father neither. But in my mind, I was doing a great job because I kept the two separated. And I didn't realize how much I hid from my household or from my daughter because she read the book and she was like, she learned so much about me, to the fact that when I was 14, I had my 16-year-old brother Truett murdered to gang and street culture, which is Kiviana's uncle. She never knew she had an Uncle Truett. Right. Because that was all gang life. And I packed that up like, this don't belong here, that don't belong there, to where she didn't. Now I realize that there's members of my family that she don't know about, that she don't have relationships with, right? And some of these things were revealed in the book. And it's like, I didn't know, like she learned so much about me.
So there were a couple of words that I kept writing in the book. And the reason I was so grateful for this galley copy was that I can write in this book, because I do not write in my books. I mean, but I'm like, oh, I'm gonna get a hardback so I can write in this one. Well, duality, that was one of the words that I kept writing over and over in it. Vulnerability and truth and tenacity. Those are the 4 words that just kept coming up for me about you in telling this story. And so what you mentioned, Kiviana, so your kids are all born at different parts of your life, right? So you have Keith Jr., you have Kiviana, you have Callie, and then most recently you have Samuel.
Yes.
And so the things that you packed up were all from different pieces of your life.
Yes.
So how do you rectify and package that? Because once Kiviana has said and read your book, does this book help you mend the relationships? Because I think Keith is he in Texas?
Yes, so Keith is in Texas. And Keith wound up going to prison while I was in prison.
Mm-hmm.
So he did 6 years. And then he came home from prison and we had conversation. And so Keith, when I had Keith, I was 17. And I was more focused on like my reputation, streets. I was scared to be a father, so I ran from it.
As you should, you're 17, you're a kid. Go ahead.
And his mother went to Texas with Keith. So there was no bonding there. There was no relationship building. You know, I was doing me, Keith was doing him. And he always had this sense of me abandoning him or choosing the streets over him or whatever. And my whole excuse was, your mother took me from you. I didn't leave you, right? But when he went to prison, came home, because Keith had 5 kids of his own, he understood what he was up against, right? As a Black man growing up in America, in the system, and in poverty, and having kids at a young age, and trying to figure it out. So once he realized that for himself, then he understood my situation, right? So we were able to meet there, because for a long time, Keith and I wasn't able to meet in the middle because we both seen it the way we seen it. And it wasn't until, I always say, you have to go through something in life to have an epiphany, right? And so he went through something and then it was illuminated, right? And so then he was able to come back and meet me and hear and see what my struggle was at 17, because now he had experienced it. Yeah.
And that makes sense. And there was no way in reading your story to actually prevent him from going through his own thing. Like you couldn't protect him from that. Also because you were compartmentalizing every single relationship.
Yes.
Yeah. And I want to go back, and I just want to look at this book, California Soul, an American epic of cooking and survival. And I think if people met you today, they would think that cooking is food. They would, right? But then you have the smoke here on the cover, which is really powerful. And I think for me, because it's completely different from how I grew up, but yet when I met you, I felt a connection to you of truth. And when I met you at your restaurant, I kept thinking, how were you able to be so truthful and so vulnerable in telling this story?
It all stems back. It all stems from growing up, right? you've had people that grew up in my community, in the projects, Jordan Downs, right? That had opportunities and succeeded and was able to get away or escape. They disappeared, right? They absolutely disappeared. They're not tangible. We don't know where they are anymore. It's like they never exist. So one, I always despise those people. I just dislike them. And not for making it out, but because you were just right here with us and you found a roadmap, a trail, and you could have been, if not for me, the generation beneath me, you could have been that representation, that example of inspiration, right? For us to see you here either shoot them up, drinking, snorting coke, doing whatever, and now you have this level of success. I can hear you when you talk to me, but instead you just left. So, and then also another thing that played a part in it, if someone tried to give me advice and I didn't believe that they knew what my struggle was, I didn't want to hear it. The number one thing was, man, you don't know what I'm going through. I don't want to hear that stuff. So it was important before I got to this whole success or level of success, I wanted to make sure that I connected with the people. I wanted the people to know who's reading this story that I am you. You are me. And in a sense, I'm telling our story, right? I wanted to be honest about where I came from, what I went through, what my struggles was, my shortcomings was, my attitude was like, my household was like, because once you can connect with me on that level, then you can see yourself in the end of the story, right?
Yeah.
That's why I had to be brutally honest, right? And then also it was an opportunity for me to be honest with myself.
So let's talk about that. I mean, your writer, Kevin Alexander, he has a way of write. Like, what was that process? Like, how did you find him? What was the process of him? Did he push you to fill in the gaps? Did he was like, wait a minute, if you said this, then what happened here? Like, what was that process like? And how long did that take? Like, what was the writing of the book process?
So Kevin, at the time I met Kevin Alexander, he was a writer for Thrillers. And our restaurant had just made top 17, made one of the top 17 restaurants in the country. We were doing an interview, he called me for an interview. And I had a lot going on at the time. I was battling with my addiction, alcoholism. I was in the middle of self-sabotaging because I was bitter about the dynamic and relationship between me and Alta and how the ownership wasn't coming on time. You know, I was feeling exploited. I had a lot of emotions that I was just expressing them. And he was like, man, people need to hear your story. Have you ever thought about writing a book? And it's like, you think of writing books, you think of buying houses, put that shit, like it's not obtainable to people where I come from, right? And so he told me he'll call me right back. He called his agent, and then they talked. And then the agent called me, David, and then we talked. And then we wound up putting a deal together, right? Where Kevin decided that he will spend the time to write this story before we even have a deal, right? And when we got started writing this story, Kevin got so invested in it that I always say he walked away from his day-to-day job. Like, he left Thrillers. If that's 100% true or not, but he left his job and really was tuned in to writing this story. And so So we would sit 3 nights out the week. I would put the kids to bed with Renee, do all that, and then I would go down to my truck and sit in the truck, call Kevin up, we'd turn the recorder on, and I would just talk for 2 to 3 hours for 3 nights out the week for just over 2.5 years. And then we would transcribe them. He would put things together. Then he will call me after we get so much. He will call me, or he'll send it to me for me to read it over. But then I'm just like, no, I want to hear it. So when we get back on the phone, I'll ask him, just read it to me. He'll read it to me, and then I'll be like, no, that don't sound like me. No, that's too professor. I wouldn't use that word. I have an LAUSD education. I wouldn't use that word. And it was just shaping it to my voice, to my tone, the speed, the cadence, and all that of how I would stand and tell someone a story. And then when we got that, then we were going and fill things in, stretch things, give a little more nuances, a little more details. There was a lot Kevin didn't know, so I encouraged him to go get certain books and read up on it, especially when we talk about the Great Migration, especially when we talk about the part where it's like, yeah, I was born into gang culture and drug culture. And a lot of times, people from the outside looking in put the choice on me. Like I had a choice. And it's like, I want to answer that stereotype. This book, I try to answer a lot of stereotypes. And it's like, no, there's things that took place and transpired before I was born that set my path in motion.
And dude, it was so perfectly done. What I loved, and I apologize for cutting you off, but it was so perfectly done in your voice. The Great Migration, your grandmother, she was from Alabama?
Yes.
Okay, do you remember when I came to your restaurant and I sat down and I'm having the chow chow, and I didn't know you, but I knew about you, and that's why I was there. 2018, I went to your restaurant because my book, Carla Hall's Soul Food, was coming out a month after
I remember.
Alta opened.
Yes.
And I had the chow chow. I'm like, wait a minute, who's from Alabama, Mississippi, or Tennessee? Who is it? And you're looking at me like, what? And I'm like, this chow chow, I know this.
Yeah, those are things that was in her in the house, right? My grandmother had these things where they were just like flavor bombs.
Yeah.
And it was easy for you to just find something to eat, put between some bread and put some of this stuff on it, jams or chopped things like that, and just take whatever it was and just made it delicious. So chow chow was definitely something that I grew up with. Yeah.
But when you talk about, historically, Watts was born out of the Great Migration, all of these Black people being forced into a particular area, kind of pushed out, cordoned off with the highway, all of that. And then what do you expect? And it didn't just happen in LA. It happened in other places around the country. And
all
so
the
it
big
was
cities.
so, right. It was so beautifully done, but also you're like, it wasn't your choice. And go ahead.
So when I say it wasn't my choice, so we set it up where you have this influx of people come over during the Great Migration. War effort at the time, Black folks are getting a lot of money, they're working. They inspire to purchase more land. So they moved to Compton at the time, which was a white area. So they're going from Watts to bigger pieces of land that Compton had to offer right next door. And that disrupted some people. Some people was upset. And so there was this white flight, right? And from there, Compton had a chokehold on it. No investment, no resources, none of these things. So now we're in this impoverished situation, right? And with poverty comes crime, right? And I'm not gonna jump off, but this idea of prison systems stopping crime does not. If you take people out of poverty, you get rid of crime.
Oh,
right?
100%. I mean, the prison systems is a whole other business
Yes.
unto itself, another form of slavery as you make people work below rate. That's a whole other business that is happening. Okay, go
Yes.
ahead.
So when I was 13, 14, I used to go to my older brother, Samuel Bo, who had this, you know, he controlled this drug circuit in a certain area of Watts. I used to go to him to get money. And Truett used to always be that one to kind of encourage our older brother to give me what I want. So when I lost Truett, I lost that. So when I went to Bo wasn't really into like putting everything on the line to give this money away. So he decided to teach me how to get money, but he's never worked before. He grew up in the same situation I'm in, broken homes, poverty. He learned the trade. So he plugged me into that trade. He taught me how to get money in the way that he knew. Taught me how to cook drugs at 13, 14 years old. You have some families who grandfather had a head start, who was able to get land and build riches and send the first generation off to college. And this tradition continued on and continued on. And as their great grandkids decide to do something with their life now, they have this network or infrastructure that they can be plugged into. They got connections at Harvard. You come home, they have connection to a law firm they can be plugged into. Well, my network that my family and my community had developed for me to be plugged into was the drug trade. and so when it came time for me to stand up on my own and go to work to provide for myself, because my mother was on drugs, I got a job in the drug trade. And my brother, the first thing he taught me was to be in control of my own product. So he taught me how to cook drugs, 13, 14 years old.
And it makes sense. And when you outline it that way, it makes perfect sense. And I'm going to go back to, around that time when you're in middle school, high school, and the whole duality of being really smart, but also being of the streets. And then,
nerd.
Yeah. And then you have this teacher, Mrs. Banks.
Yes.
There's always somebody in our lives outside of our families that we can look to who is inspiring. Can you talk about her?
Ms. Banks she was awesome. Not only was, 13, 14 having a crush on your teacher, like everybody has that teacher, right? But it was, Ms. Banks didn't see a bad kid that she took to, right? She let me know she's seen a curious kid, a kid who was fighting for something different, but the gravitational pull. So it was more of encouraging a desire or something that was already there. It wasn't one of those, the kid coming to school hungry, something to take to him and feed him. No, it was like she seen something that I wanted, but I was losing a battle towards. She knew I wanted to be in school. I love school. I gave the challenging questions. One of the things that fired Ms. Banks, because I always kind of thought outside the box. We had this conversation in classroom, and we were talking about liquids, solids, and gas. And, she was explaining what a gas was, steam, vaporized, what a solid was, things that has a shape, doesn't move, and then what like liquid, solid, and gas.
What a
Liquid takes the shape of anything. So I say, Miss Banks, what is dirt? What is soil? What is sand? It appears to be a solid, but it takes the shape of anything. And like that was our relationship where like I asked the tough questions. I always was paying attention. I was curious. And if something didn't make sense, like I investigated it. And that's what brought Miss Banks to my aid, to like, there's something there, you know, but those type of questions also like infuriated her.
Because it challenged her, which was really great. She'd probably go home and praise you. But in this story, you know, and I think, and I am also reading it from my perspective. We look at drug dealers in a particular way because we have the media, we have movies, I mean, that's how we get to know a drug dealer, right? Or what we think about a drug dealer. When I read about you at 13 and how you were bored and you're like, you know, I'm going to drop out of school, and you dropped out in 10th grade, like half a 10th grade year. And then like senior year, you saw all of your friends graduate and you're like, oh, wait a minute, you were bored. I don't want them to leave me. Like at the beginning of senior year, you decided to catch up and do 2.5 years.
In 1 year.
In 1 year.
Yes.
So that says to me, that is a smart person that is overlooked. And a lot of times I feel like in society, and they want to check a box and say, I'm helping this guy. They want to say, I pulled him up. But your intelligence, if you were somewhere else, it would have been a completely different story.
Yes.
And I think that is the power of your story. For you and all of these other people who are like you.
Thank you. That's the part that people do not want to recognize with my story. I'm not this needle in a haystack. I'm not this unicorn, right? There's many people. There's a community of people, right? Just think about it like this. I did 10 years in prison. When I first walked in there, I had this perception of like, it's supposed to be, you know, just violence, this, that, and the other. And yes, I had my squabbles. I had my run-in with the guards, my riots due to the race and the segregation and all that. But I also seen ingenuity and creativity like I've never seen before with the inmates, right? These special minds that's locked up because they did not have an opportunity, because of the situation, because of where they live, because how the system is set up and designed, right?
But when we even talk about enslaved people and we talk about the ingenuity that they had to create tools to do things, to cook, and the recipes that have been passed down to generations, it was the ingenuity that keeps our culture being passed down through those recipes.
Yeah.
Right. I was in a taxi in New Orleans once, and this driver was saying, you know, there are a lot of people out here who are privileged, and they are wearing that like a badge of honor, but we don't get to choose our name. We don't get to choose our race. We don't get to choose our appearance or what station they are in life. So what gives us the right to think that we are better than someone else? And so I was thinking about that when I'm reading this book, because all of like the political things that you're constantly thinking about and balancing with all of the different gangs, what that looks like going into a room and having to suss out who is what and where they are. I just kept thinking about, what if you got to use that energy on just freaking doing the thing? I don't know, like. like opening a business, but instead you have to do it. You're thinking about survival and the other thing.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you don't get to focus on one thing at one time. Like you don't get to put everything in one direction. Even now, like even when I'm doing all these talks, they have me on CBS News. They wanted to do a day in the life. They wanted me to take them through my old neighborhood. And it's like, excuse my French, fuck. This is bringing the association all the way back, right? Like, yes, I'm always tethered to where I come from. My people know that. Like, I know that. But here you go, bringing up my name with Grape Street again. Damn, do you know how vulnerable that makes me feel, how paranoid I get? And like, until nothing happened, it's like, why is it always, I understand the story. Why is that always gotta be the story?
So do you understand now why you never see the people who left come back and share that story?
I can understand now. I'm like my son.
Right.
Yeah.
For you to, basically what you have done in this book, you have decided to label yourself and connect yourself for future generations. You've decided to connect. I mean, in being so vulnerable, you've decided to connect yourself in order to help other people. So you might be frustrated. You might be like, damn, I'm another box checker. I mean, I saw so many times, I'm like, oh my God, even as a Black woman, I'm like, oh, you know, the box checking, like you as the product of somebody else's, like they're attaboy, right?
Yeah.
You know, there are lots of those moments in your book. When you first opened Alta, talk to me about when you first opened Alta with Daniel and you were so excited to be this Black chef / restaurant owner. And then when you realized you weren't really an owner.
That I wasn't going to be.
Yeah.
It broke me. Like it did something to me on the inside. And I've dealt with a lot of things in life, in the streets. But I always say that it's harder on the other side of this door, right? Especially when I come across things that I have to learn how to process. I have to learn the proper response. I can't just go upside the motherfucking head, right? So, and though, like, it's hard, but I felt trapped. I was excited, you know, I was trusting. We had a conversation. I had an idea. We had a conversation. We had an agreement. And so I didn't expect for us to get ready to open after we created this whole menu and this whole idea. Excuse me. I didn't have no reason to think that they wouldn't follow through. But they set me down, Daniel set me down and told me that, you know, the investors, the people, whoever, didn't think it was a good idea. And then I try to look back in retrospect right now and be like, did I really deserve it? You know, it makes you question. You know, I was on drugs, I wasn't focused. I was just learning how to run a business. I ain't put in no work. I didn't spend 20 years in the kitchen. There's other people who has been putting in the work for this. Then it comes back down to, like, you know, where I come from, your word is your word.
Right. Your word is your bond.
That's it.
Your word is your bond. You know,
I can make all the excuses for what happened, but when it comes back to my nature, it's like I was wronged. And I knew that, and I felt it. So I felt trapped because one, my people, the coach, like I've been participating in this false narrative in the hopes that it would be rectified rapidly.
Mm-hmm.
But it didn't go, it went on. And the more it went on, and the more the story got bigger. And I'm seeing folks come supporting me in the business on this false narrative. It just perpetuated my drug use and I had to escape. And so I was just loaded 90% of the day.
Yeah.
I'll come to the restaurant and my sous chef Gwen will look at me and be like, just get out of here, I got it. Right? That situation almost literally destroyed me. It almost destroyed me. I felt so overwhelmed myself, so pressured. I felt fake for the first time in my life. I prided myself on being a real motherfucker, being straight up real, right?
Yeah.
Build my reputation on being real, being known for being a solid, real gangster. And that I felt fake.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know how to deal with being fake.
I want to remind everybody to put your questions in the YouTube chat for Keith, because I know you're probably you're chomping at the bit. Keith, it's interesting because I've had a restaurant and I was the owner and I wasn't ready to be the owner and I lost a lot of money. So for me, I feel like the universe protected you because, and people tell me this now, when you do a restaurant, it's better to have OPM, other people's money.
Yeah.
So much better to have other people's money. The other thing is, and we've talked about this last weekend, we had the family reunion, Kwame Nwachi's family reunion, food and wine. And the question came up about supporting Black businesses and Black restaurants. And that's one thing, but also supporting restaurants where there are Black chefs and they are Black run. And that is just as important. Yes. And so even though I know that it's changed for you now, it's just as important. And I'm saying this to the group and to the people watching, it is just as important to support not only Black owned restaurants, but Black run restaurants, because it was your food.
And that's what there was an incident at Loco where we ran into some challenges. And I was responsible for hiring all these people in my community at the restaurant. And when things didn't work out for me, I shut the restaurant down. I had everybody leave out, chain the door, and then turned all the trucks around, told them this restaurant will not be operating in my community no more. Y'all could take that stuff back to the warehouse. And I was being selfish, because I wasn't thinking about the people that were still getting checks and depending on us to feed their family, that I had helped get in that position. And so when it came back around to Alta, of course, I wanted to respond the same way. But I had learned early on that it was still being Black ran and operated.
Yeah.
Right. And I kind of kept up with the facade so people can still have a chance. And I'm glad I did, because had I gave up in that uncomfortable situation, I wouldn't be where I'm at now.
Yeah.
Not just with owning Alta, but just sticking through the hard times and having this conversation with you today.
Yeah. Well,
learning a lesson. I bet you one thing, I won't never go through that shit again.
Right, because you did the hard lesson. Look, so we have a couple of questions, Keith. So Paula asks, if it's not too personal, could you talk about what started you on the path to sobriety?
So I thought that, for one, I wanted to change my legacy and the conversation people were having around me. And I talk about this in the book in regards to some of the stories that I was getting to my kids. that kind of put me on this path of wanting to change. But I didn't want to change that. I thought that I can have this good life, still having my drugs, my cocaine and my alcohol. But during that time with Alta, I started to really spiral out of control. So there was two things that really happened to where I said, I need to get this together. One, my daughter, Callie. So I've never had drugs around my kids. Callie happened to be in the car with me. Well, actually, I came home and I wanted to go out and party. And so Callie, the energy from kids, she was like, Daddy, just lay down. And I'm like, no, you lay down, go to sleep. She was with Renee. And so Callie wouldn't lay down. So I'm like, I'm gonna just drive her around until she go to sleep. But I'm driving her around, she won't go to sleep. And Callie like, Daddy, let's just go lay down for the sun come up. And I'm like, fuck, all right. So I stopped by my people, my man's house, and I grabbed some drugs, and I go home. And when I realized what I did, I broke. Literally, I broke. I screamed, hollered, I cried, I beat my steering wheel. I couldn't believe what I just came to. And when I got back to the house, I walked in my wife's room and told Renee, hey, I've lost control of this. I need help. Can you help me?
Yeah.
And she got on the phone and started making phone calls. And so while I was in rehab, couldn't take it. But I had already started the process for the book. And when I was calling home, one of the things, because I wanted to leave the rehab, and she was like, do you plan on being honest in your book? I'm like 100% honest. And what do you want this book to be? Like, I wanted to inspire people. Well, you can't start on drugs and end on drugs. So if you're going to be honest in this book and you wanted to inspire people, what's inspiring about still being on drugs? Right? You want to show them your growth. Like, right? Like, this is not the end of your story. You're still in the same spot. Like, so those were like the big things. Alta bringing me down. All my kids compartment, like boxing things up and keeping it separate and making a mistake of making that choice with my daughter. And then Renee reminded me that you still being on drugs there's nothing inspiring about that.
She was like, dude, let me tell you. Well, on the heels of that and talking about inspiration, so Sally asks, she said, she thought what you said about that successful people leaving and not staying around, and not staying to inspire. So what plans or goals do you have to try to make a difference in the old neighborhood?
Oh, I'm tangible. I just was like, and it's crazy. I forced myself because one, going back to the hood, like, well, being in the hood, there's so much that go on that you grow up in it, that you become equipped, right? You get sharp, your responses, your view, it's like being in war. It's like you've been in the jungle, your senses heighten, and something come over you where you're ready for this terrain. Well, damn it, I've been removed from that terrain and environment for some time now. So, and now I'm in Westwood. So I'm uncomfortable in Westwood because I didn't grow up with nobody. Like, yeah, I have this level of success, but when I meet other successful people, they have this long family history and then they got college degrees and all that. And I don't know them, like I'm uncomfortable. Then when I go back to the hood, that situation feels uncomfortable. So I'm like in a suspended space where I feel alone.
Mm-hmm.
But what I always do is Alta, is there to provide opportunity and for me to support people in that opportunity. Hire the way we hire. And like I support people there. I go back to my community and I have conversations with people. And for lack of, I'm there to be touched. I'm there to, right? I just was there 2 nights ago, and everybody, the only first thing they wanted was a book, my book. But one guy was telling me, he's like, man, I remember seeing you shoot right there. I remember seeing you getting high right there. And now I see where you at right now.
Yeah.
Like, you have inspired us. And for those people who counted you out, you have made them look bad without saying anything to them.
Right.
Right? So I stay in tune with my folks. But not just my community. There's many communities like Watts, right? And it's not just about the Jordan Downs. It's about people in the struggle, people in poverty, people who need someone to look to. When I got my job at Loco, I didn't treasure that opportunity because there was no one for me to see, right? I didn't know where that job would take me, so I didn't treasure it.
You know, but to that point, and when I was reading, about Local and then it ending, and also how all of the celebrities from the nice parts of town, they weren't coming back anymore, and the people in the community couldn't support that business, right?
Yeah.
One thing that you did, and I was so happy to see it, you talked about all of the different people who came through that program. And because that was the success. It wasn't
That's
about
the success.
That's the success. Yes.
I'm the success of Loco. How can you say, and every time I do an interview and somebody asks this, for those who say Loco is a failure, boom.
Yeah.
Because I wouldn't be here had not been for Loco.
Yeah.
How can you call Loco a failure and say that I'm a success story?
Right. And it's
that
not just
doesn't even make sense.
It's not just me. You're like, it was the dishwashers, all these other cooks people who went on to do restaurants, and people who are working in other places. And that is the thing. And I think for anybody who is here, and when you share this book, it's not about one person. It's not about putting people on a pedestal. No. That doesn't help anybody.
No.
It's about the systems that they're going through and that you're building, and Daniel coming back and you all doing things together, and all of those people, that all of those tentacles go out. It's not one person. It's all the people that come through that system.
So when you think about it, you have me coming from Loco. I have a restaurant that employs about 45 people.
Yeah.
Right. Then you have Cornisha Coleman, who was there, who now has a trucking company. I think she has about 4 trucks. That's 4 people driving, right? At the minimum. Mm-hmm. You have Lamont Lamar, who was twin brothers that were dishwashers, who did night and day shift, who has a Pop Warner team league and coach for Paramount. Right, who has sent kids to college and have one in the NFL, right? So that's another 20 to 40 kids that they're taking and changing their life. Then you have Corey in the Bay Area, who started his own cleaning company, who wound up getting contracts to clean restaurants who employ people. So that is a lot of lives. Mm-hmm. That we're touching. From Loco.
Yeah.
From Loco. We all have our tentacles out, right? You have Ronald, who do the music now and got a few people in the neighborhood music deals. We're like, so Loco is a success.
Yeah. I want to thank you for putting this book out there, for being vulnerable. I'm going to bring Nick back. Thank you for this time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And I love this conversation. We didn't just talk about prison and drugs, and we had a real conversation.
Yeah.
Right. And I love that. You know, I love when I'm able to share the nuances and the whole story and not just these beats.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
I know everyone. Oops, I do not have my camera displaying on the screen. Listen, I'm just a voice from the ether. There we go. Hello. Again, thank you everybody for coming out tonight. To everybody in the audience, we didn't have a lot of questions, but they were very chatty. So it was really great. And thanks to both of you for one, for sharing your story, and two, for asking such insightful questions. A really excellent talk tonight. I know everybody else. Well, very good. Wow, what an inspiring story. Bravos already. See, we already got the comments pulling in. I'd like to remind everybody, the book today is American California Soul.
That's the same.
I keep saying it. California Soul. California Soul. We sell it at bookpassage.com. See, I can get that one right. We can ship it to your house just like every other online retailer, or if you happen to live in the Bay Area, you can pick it up at either of our stores. Either way, we're very happy for you coming with us. Thank you one last time to both of you for coming out and having a good chat tonight. If either of you write another book and want to come to Book Passage again, please let us know. We'll come by. I'm sure everybody here would really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Dick. Thank you, Keith.
Thank you.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Thank you.